Volume 3, we're learning Shaar Hayichud Vehaemunah. And we're in the second chapter, and we are on page 27. So we said that there are those, they believe in Hashem, and they don't believe in Hayichud Pratis. They don't believe in the miracle that in the Torah. And the reason is because they believe that Hashem created the world. And then after that, everything runs on automatic. The automatic is the laws of nature. So they don't realize that Hashem's creation is so different than the human creation. In Hashem's creation, Hashem recreates the world every moment. And why is it different? After all, on the surface, it looks like it's the opposite. That means it's weaker. So we explained yesterday, no, this is different between yesh mi yesh and yesh mi ayin. Something which is new, and it's absolutely new, needs the creative force to continuously create it and recreate it. Because the fact that it's absolutely new means it has no substance on its own. And it's only here because of the creative force. So the moment that creative force is no longer present, there is no basis for this to exist. Yesh mi yesh means something that already existed. It was their potential. And all I did was I was instrumental in taking whatever was there potentially and bringing it out in actuality. But it has its own, it's self-substantial, it has its own source, has its own origin. It's not totally dependent on me. You know, the potential for silver to turn into a menorah, a silver menorah, doesn't come from me. That comes from the piece of silver itself. All I did was allow that potential to come out. And therefore, it can continue to exist without me as well. In order to explain this further, he goes on to bring the example of Kriyas Yamsuf. So that's page 27. This is even more of a wonder and something more outstanding than Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea. What happened by the splitting of the sea? The way Hashem split the sea wasn't just they walked over and the sea split. But it says in the Chumash, this is in the Chumash itself, that there was a wind. An east wind was blowing all night. A very strong wind was blowing all night. And then, in the time that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted it to happen, the water split, which means the water was split by the wind, and the wind was supporting the water to be upright. By Yibaku Hamayim, the water split. The nitzvu k'moinedu k'chayma, and they stood upright like a wall. Ve'ilu hipsik Hashem es haruach kerega. If Hashem would have discontinued that wind, even for one moment, hoyamayim chayzim v'nigarim v'meiret kedarkam v'tivam. The water would instantly go back down like their natural way, which is not to go upward, but to flow. And without a doubt, they wouldn't be standing upright, because that's against the nature of water. And the only reason they stood upward, like a wall, was because of the wind. So the moment the wind would stop, immediately everything would be discontinued. Page 28. By the way, we just finished saying that these people that the Alter Rebbe is addressing, Alter Rebbe said they don't believe in Hashgacha Pratis and they don't believe in the miracles. So how can we bring proof to them from Kriyas Yamsuf? And the answer is that obviously when Alter Rebbe is talking about Kriyas Yamsuf, it's not about them. Now that Alter Rebbe is talking to a person who believes in Hashem, believes in the miracles, and therefore, based on that, you can learn from the story of Kriyas Yamsuf how the creative force has to constantly be there and create. And I was going to show that the newness in creating the universe is so much more than the newness in just creating the nature of the water going upward. The nature of water going upward is also something which is Yeshmai. I'll soon explain. Let me just say the word. The stone wall stands by itself. There's no wind that's holding it up. That means the nature of things to stand upright independently existed before. In other words, Al-Rebbe says, let's analyze what happened with the Yamsuf. In the case of the Yamsuf, the water was here before. So what's the newness? What was created here? What was created was the nature to go upward. Even that, the Alter Rebbe says, wasn't the same like the creation of the world, because the nature to go upward also existed, but it didn't exist in water. So the newness was that this nature of things to stand upright, which other things in the world have that nature already, that nature was attached to the water now, which naturally doesn't have it. And because that's new, so therefore the moment the wind would stop, it would fall down. How much more so when you talk about the creation of the universe, where there was nothing there before to even begin to talk about. So everything is new from the start. Certainly without the energy of Hashem and the words of Hashem, which is creating it, it would all, in a second, would become null and void. That's what he's saying. We can learn from the story of Kriyas Yamsuf. So the Koshke V'Kal, how much more so, the Brias Yeshmayin, when we talk about creating something out of nothing, Shilamayla Mahateva, V'Hafla V'Fela, Yesim Kriyas Yamsuf, this is so much more supernatural and so much more of a wonder than splitting of the sea. That's one of the reasons why when it says that when it says in the first pasuk in Sarah Sadivas, I am God, your God that took you out of Mitzrayim. So Mefarshim ask, and there are many Maimarim that ask this question, why I'm your God that took you out of Mitzrayim? But to say I'm your God that created heaven and earth. Taking us out of Mitzrayim was miraculous, that's true, but how could you compare that to the miracle of creating a world, Yesh Me'ayin? That's the biggest miracle of all. So over there are answers why specifically Mitzrayim is being mentioned. But clearly the creation of the world is so much more yesh me'ayin than the change in the water, then instead of flowing, it will be standing upright. So in the creation of the world, Allah has kama v'kama. How much more so, shebistalkus koich haberim and anivra chas v'sholem, that energy, the creating force which comes from Hashem, the Creator, if that would be removed, Yoshuv Anivra La'ayim Ve'efes Mamish, then the creation, whatever it is that's created, would become null and void. So this energy of Hashem has to be in it all the time, and has to sustain it, give it life, and sustain it constantly. Without that, it couldn't exist. So what is this energy? These are the words and the letters with which Hashem spoke, and this is known as Asar Maimaros, the 10 utterances. Shebahem Nivru, that the whole world was created through them, like you said before about the heaven, and the same with everything else. Page 30. And this is what the pasuk is referring to when it says, "V'ata mechaya eskulam." You Hashem, you give life to everything in the world. The Gemara says, even though it says mechaya, mechaya means give life. The word giving life means there's something that's already in existence, but it's dead. And when Hashem did, He gave it life. So the Gemara says, Al Tikra Mehachaya, don't read it as giving life, Ela Mahava, creating life. Dainu Yeshmi Ayin. A lot of times the Gemara says, actually we have this in davening also. In Ein Kalokenu, at the end, it says, don't read it Banayach, read it Bainayach. If you remember that part in davening, where it says that those who are Torah scholars, through Torah study, they build the world. Whenever it says something like that, it doesn't mean we're negating what it says. Whatever it says in the Chumash is to be taken literally. It means don't read it only this way, but it also alludes to something else, which is a deeper insight of these very words. So when it says, Va'ata mechayas kulam, you give life to everything. So don't read it only that Hashem gives life, but mahava, creates, which means creates yesh me'ayin. And what does Va'ata mean? Ata means you, but Ata also hints to another thing. Hein b'chinas oisius mi'alav atov. Ata are all the letters of the alphabets. Hashem creates the world with the letters of the alphabets. The letters of the alphabet begin with an aleph and they end with a tov. So Va'ata means with these words and these letters from aleph to tov, you create the universe. So what's the hey doing there? The hey, what's the hey? He hey mitzoris apeh mokar. The hey is where the words come from when a person speaks. So there are the five, we call it the five organs of verbal articulation, which means when a person speaks, then the sound is the same, no matter what I say. But if the sound goes through the teeth, then there's certain letters like Zayin, Tzadik, Samach. And if the sound goes through the tongue, then there are different letters like Lamed, Nun. If the sound goes through the throat, then we have letters like Ches, or we learned yesterday letters like Ayin, the way it's pronounced by Sephardi Jews. And then there's the palate. So altogether there are five gateways, five ways through which the sound comes through, and that creates letters. So Va'ata, let's read it now all together. It's from Aleph to Tov, with the five ways of articulating it. That's how Hashem spoke, and that's how the world was created. Of course, he has Hashem has no body. How could we attribute these kind of things, letters and words and five organs of articulation by Hashem? This doesn't exist. Hare mikra mole dibra kosav. But it says explicitly in the Torah, Vaydaber Hashem, Hashem spoke, Vayomer Hashem, and Hashem said. So obviously it's a metaphor. The definition of a metaphor is that whatever there is in the mashal is also there in the nimshal, but in a different way. But it means that Hashem has the letters in a different way. Hashem has the five organs of articulation in a different way, but they also exist by Hashem. What are the letters? Yeah.
You taught us, and I'm just trying to remember, like one word has many different configurations, and you can substitute letters. And you were saying that was how we got the billions of. Was that right? That you?
Yeah.
Okay, I just couldn't remember what that.
What I said is that also that by us we know words and what they mean, but there are certain letters when they come together, as far as we're concerned, means nothing. It's not a word in the Hebrew language. It might not be a word in the Hebrew language, but it is a word in Hashem's world, because even one letter alone has a lot of meaning to it. The form and the shape of the letter, the sound behind the letter, all this is a very specific kind of an existence. So therefore, it carries a certain energy and a certain light in it. When you have two things together, then you have something new, which comes as a result of the combination. So really, any two letters will be there to contain a new word. The difference between letters and a word is that each letter is something individual, but when you put letters together, something new comes there. And for whatever reason, Chassidus always gives this mashal, so we use the same mashal. Take the word Baruch. You have a Beis, you have a Reish, you have a Vav, and you have a Chof. So the base alone, just take the base alone, you will have who knows what. You can have books and volumes explaining what the base is all about. One of the things which brings this out more openly is a very interesting medrash, and the medrash is found as an introduction to the Zohar. And the Zohar says when Hashem came to create the world, every letter came to Hashem and applied for the job and said, Hashem, create the world with me. And Hashem told the Aleph, no, I can't create the world with you because of this and this reason. So the Gimel came, create the world with me. I can't create with you because, and gives all the reasons for Gimel, Dalet, A, every single letter. Then it came to the Beis, and Hashem said, yes, you're the right letter, and with you I'll create the world, Breishis bara Elokim. So we're talking about a letter, not a word. Just a letter alone is coming to Hashem and saying, create. It means a letter alone contains in it infinite wisdom. So when you take two letters together, now you have a Beis, a Reish, a Vav, and a Chav. So the Reish has infinite wisdom in it, the Vav has infinite wisdom in it, the line of Chav has, so each one of the four letters has wisdom in it. But when I put the four together, there's something new here. It wasn't there before. And what is it? The meaning of blessing. Because Baruch means a blessing. So basically, when you take two letters, you put it together, there's a new thing that's added, that comes there. It's like we say about a minion. Every yid has a neshama, and every yid has a certain presence of Hashem's presence within him. I have mine, you have yours, and there are another 9 people. But when 10 people get together in one room to daven with a minion, now that all the 10 get together, there's something new here, which comes as a result of the combination of the details. And that's something new, which is more than just the details with each other. There's actually Rashi and Chumash that says we even see this physically. Where Rashi and Chumash says that if 2 people are carrying something, I would think that if one person has the ability to lift 50 pounds and the other person has the ability to lift 50 pounds, together they can lift 100 pounds. So Rashi says, no, together they can lift 150 pounds. Why? So what we see from this is that I have my energy, I have your energy, and when we merge, that brings a new energy, which is a result of both together. And that's Begashmis, and certainly Baruchnis. So therefore, when it says in the Chumash, Hashem spoke, it's a metaphor, which means Hashem reveals his light through the Chav Beis Eisius El Yenus, through the 22 letters, but again, not letters the way we know them, letters in a spiritual sense. Again, to use an example, what we're looking at now on this piece of paper are letters. When we speak, we also say the same words. Yeah, I'm saying actually what it says here. But what's coming out of my mouth doesn't look like this. Right? I hope. This is ink on paper, and this is words. And not only that, but then I could also think about it in my head. When I'm thinking, words and thought are also altogether different. But they have something in common. I'm thinking of these words, Atam Achayas Kulam, in my head, then I have it in paper, then I can have it in speech. It's the same words, the same sentence, but this is on paper with physical dimensions, and this is speech, and this is in thought. So you just keep going by Hashem. It's the same words, but in a different kind of existence, in a spiritual kind of existence, not something physical. It doesn't have physical dimensions. But it's just like our words are conduits through which we can express my thoughts and my feelings and my insights to another person, which means if I want to tell you something that I understand, I can't say it without words. So in a certain sense, the words are technical. It's the content, it's the question, the answer, the insight, or emotion. I want to communicate a feeling. It's the feeling that I'm communicating, but I cannot communicate this without words. There's no way. So too, Hashem wants to communicate and transmit his light from a higher level to a lower level. And how does he do this? Through something which spiritually is like words and like letters. And there are 22 kinds of different forms, and through them, his light shines to a lower level, which is to the Nevi'im. When Hashem speaks to a Navi, he also speaks the words. So we hear the message from Hashem coming to his head, and by Hashem, it goes through those words. I would imagine, though, I think this would be the case, that when the Yidden heard Hashem speak by Har Sinai, they actually heard words and a voice the way we know it in our physical world, because it was spoken to us. So first of all, Hashem's message is enclosed in their intellect, that they should comprehend what Hashem is saying, and then they think about it in their thought, and then they speak it to the people, because the Navi is supposed to give over Hashem's message to the people. Like it says in the Pasuk, Ruach Hashem Diber Bi, this is a prophet speaking, and he says, the Spirit of Hashem speaks within me, Umilosai, and his words, Al Lishani, are on my tongue. So even though I'm speaking, and you see me speaking, but in essence, it's Hashem's words coming out through my mouth. So a Navi is like the keli through which Hashem's message comes through. That's an amplifier. Hashem speaks through this amplifier. The Arizal, in his writings, has a place where he talks about prophecy. It's called Shaar Hayichud, the gate of prophecy. And over there, he explained this whole idea. So basically, what we're saying is that just there, like there are letters in the physical sense, there's also letters there. What does it mean there are letters? It means there's something there, which is, again, not physical, but its function is that through these spiritual olive bays, that's how Hashem's light shines from one world to the next world, to the next world, to the next world. So, for example, when we say in a different, using different terms, that Malchus of Atzilus, that's the source which creates the next world. What is Malchus? Malchus is speech. Hashem speaks and creates the next world. And he speaks in the next world and creates the third world. And then he speaks and creates the next world. That's what it means. Everything goes through speech. But what is speech? It's basically 22 different forms, and through these forms, the light gets formed. Yeah.
This might be too technical. We can talk about it after this, but we learned that like Hashem on Shabbos didn't speak, and he thought because on Shabbos for him to speak would be breaking, I don't know, like breaking Shabbos, I guess. But and he's held to the same standards we are. How is his thought and his speech different?
Then
each other. Like when he's thinking and things are still being created, but versus him speaking it, things are being
passion, just like by us, thought is just much closer to me, much more internal, and speech something external. So Hashem, his thought means something that's happening on a more internal level, something deeper, closer connected to Hashem. And speech is something which is more external. In different words, what comes through thought is not so tangible, it's not so formed, it's not so concrete. What comes through speech is much more tangible, has much more of a form, and to the extent that it's so tangible and accessible, someone else knows what I'm saying. So the same thing with Hashem. Basically, higher and lower in different words is more finite or less finite, more abstract or less abstract. So machshava is less abstract.
He can create with his thought.
Hashem could, yeah.
But does it have the same like letters like the aleph face?
Yeah, but it's not the aleph. It's not. Doesn't look like this. It's something baruchnius, but it's the source for the aleph that we have.
So, just follow up on that question. What would then be the difference on a spiritual level between Hashem thinking and speaking, since Hashem doesn't literally have a mouth?
So that's what Ariel just asked, and the answer is when Hashem communicates his light and energy to a higher spiritual world, he doesn't need speech. That he communicates that through thought. It's like if I want to think to myself, I don't have to speak. Most people don't talk to themselves unless nobody's around. Yes, there are some times where people do that, but generally speaking, the need for speech is to communicate to someone else. So that means if I'm communicating it to myself, I do need thought, because there are a lot of things going on. What is thought? Thought means things being communicated from my subconscious to my conscious. And without thought, I can't handle that either. I can't relate to that either. So basically, when Hashem shines his light and transmits his light from one high level to a lower level, but also a very high infinite level, that's where thought comes in. When he wants to create the physical world, or let's say a lower world, that's where speech comes in. And I guess based on that, there are infinite levels in thought and speech. Each world, there's a thought and speech of this world, there's a thought and speech of the next world, and so on. Like you might say, animals they'll also have thought and speech, but their thought and speech is not like our thought and speech. Ours is much more sophisticated than theirs. And angels have thought and speech, but it's more sophisticated than ours. And Hashem has thought and speech, and that's more sophisticated than ours. And in each world, in Atzilus, the thought and speech is higher, and in Bria, the thought and speech is lower, and so on. So when Hashem is giving over a message to a Navi, basically what's happening is Hashem is speaking, which means Hashem is shining his light through these 22 letters. It goes into the head of the Navi, so the Navi hears a message, thinks about it, and then he speaks it. And Ke'ein Zeh, something similar to this, is a slapshus or Eishis Bebrum. The same thing happens when Hashem creates, like it says, B'dvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu. The heavens were made by the word of Hashem. Uberuach Piv Kol Tzvam, and all the hosts of the heaven were created by the breath of his mouth. So what's the difference between a Navi and the word of Hashem that creates the heaven or the earth? The answer is that the light of Hashem that goes to the head of a Navi, whether it be Moshe Rabbeinu or any Navi, doesn't go through so many levels of change. The light of Hashem that's spoken, and it goes through speech, thought and speech spiritually, until it finally comes down and gets invested into a physical object like a tree. That means that this light of Hashem and the speech of Hashem evolved hundreds of thousands and millions of levels more than what goes on in the brain of a Navi. So in the brain of a Navi, it goes through, let's say, 1 million changes. And when it comes down into the creating something physical, it goes through 1 billion, 100 billion changes. That's the difference. But in essence, it's the same idea. It's Hashem's words and Hashem's speech. So it goes through much more changes, until the letters could descend, lasi gufnis, and it actually becomes part of this gashmistic world. Mashenkin, Asagas, and Nevi'im, but when we talk about the Nevi'im, the prophets, that they comprehend and they're able to perceive spiritual messages, that's Batzilus and Mislabish Beilam Abriya. That's like the light of Atzilus that is invested in the world of Bria. So the Navi, in a sense, is able to ascend to the world of Bria. And what is he able to get in that world? He can get a message which comes from the world of Atzilus. And that helps you better. That's why we talk more general. It's easy to follow a higher world, a lower world, but that's the difference. This is what it means when we say letters of Hashem. So when it says in the Chumash, Hashem spoke, and also it could be Moshe Rabbeinu. Ultimately, there was a voice that he heard, but it basically means that there was a light of Hashem that went through different changes through the 22 letters of the alphabets, the way the letters are up there, and that formed words and sentences, and that transmitted a question, an answer, a concept to Moshe Rabbeinu in his head. And then eventually he put that down on paper in the Chumash. So now we have two things. We have a summary of chapter 1, and we have a summary of chapter 2. The summary of chapter 1 is that Hashem creates and recreates the world every moment, and if he wouldn't do that, the world couldn't exist. What's the main point in chapter 2? The main point in chapter 2 is to explain why. Just to explain why. That Gashmi is, when we create, humans create, no matter which thing you talk about, there's always going to be yesh miyesh. It's always that I took something which is a pre-existing material and or pre-existing potential, and I brought out that potential of the actual. But creation of Hashem is yesh me'ayin, and therefore it needs to be done constantly, on a constant basis. Now that we know these two principles, we go to chapter 3, which is going to introduce the whole concept of bittul, based on these two principles. Any questions before we continue? Let's explain it so good, there's no questions.
What if,
Anything, so, yeah.
I feel like this is a really simple answer, but what about when you have a child? Like, I understand that there's the potential exists, but like the fact that it has life, like I guess that comes from Hashem, so it's not even you.
Right.
Okay.
Everything is already programmed in the mother and the father. Hashem put it all in their physical body, that's the nature, that through this process, a new child comes into the world.
Yeah, but the fact that that child has life, like I understand making like a body, but like the fact that it has like a staple and everything, but that comes from Hashem, not from.
Or you can say, well, the parents also have a life. They both have neshamas. So their neshamas are being transmitted. Okay. Yeah. But what?
Like, I thought that we gave birth yes and I, and we think that.
So the truth is, there's two things in the world that are used as a mashal for yesh me'ayin, and yet we say it's not a perfect mashal. It's just at least externally looks similar. One is the birth of a child is to a certain extent yesh me'ayin, because after all, it's coming from what? From something which has no substance at all, almost nothing, and there are cells in there, and this develops into a human being. The contrast between what was and what is almost like yesh me'ayin. The other example is also with a seed in a field. This is a human seed, and this is a seed. You put a little seed in the ground, come back a few years later, there's a tree that's thousands of times bigger than the seed, and branches and fruits and leaves and wood that all came from, it's also relatively yesh me'ayin. But after everything's said and done, the earth was here before, the seed was here before, the potential was already here before, so ultimately it's really yesh me'yesh. And the same with the human. Okay, so now that we have these two principles, number one, that Hashem creates the world every second. Now we know the reasons, because it's yesh me'ayin, so therefore it cannot exist on its own, even for a split second. It's not that Hashem is Chas v'Shalom mean and doesn't let it live another second. It just means that it needs Hashem's presence every second, because why? It's nothing else but Hashem. It doesn't have any substance in its own right, and therefore it has nothing to stand on. And the only thing that it can stand on is the creative force, which is Hashem. This leads us to understand the concept of bittul. So now we'll start chapter 3. Following these words of truth, to understanding what creation is all about, kol maskil al davar, every person who was able to understand, Yovin Lashure will understand clearly, Echshekol Nivra V'yesh, that every creation and everything that exists will be'emes nechshav la'ayim ve'efes mamish. In essence, it's considered absolutely nothing Legabe, in relationship to the koyach hapel, to the creative force, shebenifo, that's in this created being. Hamahaba is tamid, that's creating it constantly, umetzir ma'ayim mamish liyesh, and creates it yesh mi'ayim. So in other words, when something is not yesh mi'ayim, but yesh mi'yesh, like the example we gave before, you take a man takes a piece of silver, forms it into a menorah, and yes, the menorah couldn't have come into existence without the person who has the skill and knows how to take silver and turn it into a menorah. Beautiful. But now the menorah exists on its own. I can't say the menorah is nothing in comparison to the person. Look, the menorah has its own independent identity because the person is now no longer there. He walked away, and the menorah continues to exist. So clearly it has its own identity. But being that the world cannot exist without Hashem's energy, that means that what's really the source of energy is Hashem. So this is a general rule, and it's applied in many different ways, that if something exists only because of something else, then that's its true existence. So I'm going to use the mashal that we always give, just because, again, something we can relate to, even though it's a little bit different, but the idea is the same idea, that we have a piece of paper, my mashal, and there's a wind blowing, and now the paper's flying in the wind. So the paper is not new, of course, and the paper doesn't depend on the wind. The paper is a paper before the wind, after the wind. But the flying is the wind. In fact, the paper doesn't even fly. It's not only that the paper became a flying object, but it owes it to the wind. In essence, the paper never became a flying object. The paper is a dead object. The wind is moving, and because the paper is sitting on the wind, so the paper moves. It looks like that. It's, I guess you would call it an optical illusion. Right now, if I move this cup, is the cup a moving cup? No, the cup hasn't changed one iota, but it's moving. Yes, my hand is moving, not the cup. With the wind, it's the same thing, except you don't see a wind. So therefore, it looks like, oh, the paper is flying. But in reality, it's the wind that's moving. The paper's sitting on the wind, and the moment the wind stops, the paper comes flying down. So the principle is the same principle. This is really non-existent. What is causing it to exist? The power of Hashem. Without that, it couldn't exist a second. That means that in essence, what's really in existence is Hashem's words, not the cup. Because the cup itself, in its own right, has no basis to exist. Which means it's not only because later, if Hashem will take his words out, this object will disappear. It means even while it doesn't disappear, when it's still around, in essence, it's not really alive. It's not really there. It's the energy of Hashem that's there, and that's sustaining it. And that's really its true identity. That's what it means. Of course, bittul is one of the hardest things to understand. But this is one of the main sources to understand the concept of bittul. There's a mashal that Rabbi gives here, which he brings often, and my Morim often quote this mashal and make reference to this mashal. So this will be the next piece we have to learn. Is about the Indian of bittul. What does it mean? What does bittul mean, and what is it based on? To be continued tomorrow in Yirtzeh Hashem.
Thank you.
I just want to say that a lot of times you see you use the word bittul, it means to nullify. And it doesn't have such a good connotation, nullified. It's like, you're gone. It's not about nullifying, it's about recognizing what our true identity is. It's not about destroying something. And it's not about becoming null and void. It's about recognizing that I am a creation, I was here, Hashem put me into this world, but to recognize what my true identity is, Hashem's words, not what I think it is on the outside.
Beautiful way of looking at it.
Okay, what?
It's a beautiful way of looking at it. Sometimes it's nullified.
Right.
The truth. True.
Right. I mean, actually, I remember somebody once that brought it to my attention tell me that it doesn't appreciate Chassidus because it just turns you into nothing. You're a nothing. But because you're not a nothing, you're the biggest something when you learn Chassidus. Well, everybody, we get the rest of the day. Yeah.
When did Hashem create letters?
When did he create letters? I guess letters are created by the Kalim. And everyone is spheres, light and Kalim.
So when he created the spheres, the letters were all.
Letters are like an extension of Kalim. Yeah,
Okay.
they belong to the same family.
Well, I'm just.
Yeah.
Didn't know
Yeah.
what time. I think so, sure, sure. So when you said that we're in the lion, but they're not really the word right here.
Oh, look what I brought for us, even though I already learned it. Because I stopped reading it. We're gonna go on the rest. Yeah. Hi.